Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. My name is David Lawson, and I've shared nearly 24 years of marriage with Grace. Our journey together began in a setting I never expected, a poetry reading in downtown Chicago. It wasn't the kind of place I usually frequented, but my best friend Jake had convinced me to go. He was captivated by one of the performers. That's where I first noticed Grace, not on the stage but standing quietly at the back, latte in hand, exuding a serene and intriguing presence. I couldn't take my eyes off her. Grace's beauty was subtle yet magnetic. Her light brown hair, touched with delicate highlights, was gathered in a loose bun. Her honey-colored eyes seemed to carry unspoken mysteries. I didn't realize it then, but meeting her marked the start of a transformative chapter in my life. A year later, we were married. Our life together was mostly filled with happiness, love, and the arrival of our two children, Rebecca and Ethan, who eventually grew up and left to build lives of their own. For the majority of our marriage, our bond appeared solid by most standards. But everything changed after the kids moved out. With just the two of us in the house, Grace began to behave in ways I couldn't understand. Initially, I chalked it up to empty nest syndrome, assuming she was struggling with the absence of our children. Yet her actions soon became more perplexing. She started coming home late, wearing clothes I hadn't seen in years, dresses that hugged her figure, plunging necklines, and heels that had long been gathering dust. It was as though she was reinventing herself into someone I didn't know. One evening, she returned close to 2 a.m., smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, and carrying a faint trace of alcohol. When I asked her where she'd been, she dismissed it with a breezy, "I'm just having fun, David. It's been so long since I've felt like this." She laughed, but the sound felt hollow, missing the warmth I'd once known. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't press her further. Then came the night everything unraveled. Grace was about to head out, dressed in a sleek black dress that fit her perfectly. Summoning all my courage, I asked her directly, "Grace, what's going on?" She looked me square in the eyes, unflinching. "David, don't pretend you don't know," she said, her tone calm yet cutting. "I've been suffocated for years. One person can't fulfill every need a woman has. I love you, but I need more. It's time you came to terms with that." Her words hit me like a freight train. I stood frozen as she walked out, her statement echoing in my mind. One person can't fulfill every need. When she returned the next morning, I was still awake, waiting for her. I confronted her again, this time with more urgency. "Are you seeing someone else?" I asked. Her reply sent a chill through me. "No, David," she said, her voice unsettlingly steady. "I'm seeing multiple people. I've been exploring what I've missed all these years." The admission was like a knife to the chest, but I managed to ask, "Why?" Her answer was blunt and devastating. "Because you don't make me feel alive anymore, and I need to feel alive." The months that followed were a haze of pain and disbelief. Grace didn't bother to hide her affairs. She came and went as she pleased, acting as though her behavior was entirely normal while leaving me to deal with the wreckage of our marriage. I felt like a stranger in my own life, powerless to stop the disintegration. At first, I did nothing. I clung to the faint hope that the Grace I married still existed somewhere beneath this new facade. But slowly, I came to the bitter realization that the woman I'd loved was gone. In her place was someone I could no longer recognize. Finally, one night, I reached my breaking point. I confronted her with an ultimatum. "If you don't stop what you're doing, we're finished," I said firmly. She responded with icy laughter. "David, you won't leave me," she said with a smirk. "I know you too well. You can't survive without me. And if you try to divorce me, I'll take half of everything. You'll end up penniless and alone. Is that what you want?" Her words cut deep, but she underestimated me. She was right about one thing. I didn't want to be alone, but she was wrong about something far more important. I wasn't as weak as she thought. That same night, I reached out to Jake. Although we had drifted apart over the years, he'd gone through his own bitter divorce and had learned a lot from it. I needed his advice. Grace's overconfidence became her downfall. She had no idea that I was preparing to end our marriage on my terms. Over the next few weeks, I played the role of the defeated, powerless husband while secretly gathering evidence of her actions. I documented her late nights, her outfits, and every suspicious interaction. With Jake's support, I hired a private investigator to collect proof. While Grace indulged in her newfound lifestyle, I worked behind the scenes to take control of our shared life. I discovered an overlooked clause in our refinancing paperwork that left the house entirely in my name. I discreetly moved most of our joint funds into accounts she couldn't access. I consulted with a divorce attorney who specialized in protecting clients from manipulative spouses. Jake and I met regularly to refine my strategy, going over every detail to ensure nothing was overlooked. In the end, Grace never saw it coming. Jake had always operated by a strict code. Every action demanded an equal and opposite reaction. His determination was unyielding, constantly driving me to reach for heights I once deemed unattainable. "She sees you as a pushover," he'd murmur, his voice sharp and brimming with urgency. "She doesn't respect you, but when this is over, she'll regret ever doubting you." And as much as I hated to admit it, Jake was right. I wasn't weak, not in the way Grace or others believed. What they mistook for complacency was, in truth, a patient calculation, a biding of time to strike when the moment was right. One evening, Grace stepped out of the bedroom, her figure draped in a crimson dress that left little to the imagination. As she prepared for another one of her outings, I casually mentioned my upcoming business trip. "I'll be out of town for a few days," I said, watching for a reaction. She barely acknowledged me, her response as indifferent as ever. "All right, have fun," she replied, not even glancing up. Her apathy was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Once she was gone, I left the house and met with my lawyer to finalize the last details. By the time I returned, the house was steeped in silence. Grace wasn't back yet, and I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, acutely aware of how close I was to executing my plan. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Grace remained oblivious, convinced I was too broken to resist her. Late one night, she stumbled through the door, the clock nearing 3 in the morning. Her unsteady gait and the smell of alcohol confirmed she'd been out drinking again. She kicked off her heels carelessly and barely looked my way as I sat in the living room, feigning grogginess while my mind remained razor sharp. "David," she slurred, leaning against the doorframe, "why are you still awake? Go to bed." "I'm fine," I answered evenly, my tone betraying none of the storm within. The room was weighed down by an uneasy silence until I finally broke it. "Grace, we need to talk." She waved me off dismissively, taking a wobbly step toward the bedroom. "Not now. I'm exhausted. We'll talk in the morning." But I wasn't letting her escape this time. "No," I said firmly, standing to block her path. "We're talking now." The steel in my voice stopped her in her tracks. She turned to face me, her expression one of mild annoyance mixed with confusion. "What's this about, David? You know how things are. Why start something now?" I met her gaze without flinching. "Because I'm done, Grace. This is the end." Her brow furrowed, disbelief flickering across her face. "The end? Don't be ridiculous. You're not going anywhere. You're too afraid of being alone." A cold smile crept onto my lips, one I'd carefully hidden for months. "You're wrong, and you'll be the one left with nothing." Her confusion deepened, but the first hints of unease began to show. I reached for the folder sitting on the coffee table and dropped it in front of her. "Take a look," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. With trembling hands, she opened the folder, her eyes darting over photographs, financial records, and reports from private investigators. The truth, laid bare, drained the color from her face. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Proof," I replied, stepping closer. "Proof that you're about to lose everything. The house, the money, your reputation, all of it." Her wide eyes met mine, fear beginning to creep into her expression. You planned this?" she stammered. "Every step," I confirmed, my tone steady and deliberate. "You'll leave here with nothing. No wealth, no assets, not even your pride." For the first time in months, Grace was rendered speechless. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "David, you can't do this." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Oh, but I already have." Her composure shattered, and the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. She tried to plead with me, her voice breaking. "David, please, I didn't mean for it to come to this. I still love you. We can fix this. Let's fix this." The word love felt hollow, a bitter reminder of what had once been. "You forfeited that the moment you decided I wasn't enough," I said coldly. "Now, you'll face the consequences." Tears streamed down her face, her hands trembling as she reached for me. "I made mistakes. I'll change. I'll stop everything. Just don't do this. Don't leave me like this." Her desperation might have been pitiable if I hadn't endured months of betrayal and contempt. Now, the roles had reversed. She was the one begging, powerless, while I held all the cards. "You still don't get it," I said, stepping closer. "This isn't about fixing anything. It's about justice. You wanted freedom from me? You have it. But you'll face that freedom penniless and alone." She collapsed to her knees, clutching at my legs as sobs racked her body. "David, don't do this. Please, I'll be better. I'll be everything you deserve." Her words meant nothing to me now. For months I had suffered under the weight of her disdain, and now she would bear the burden of her choices. I looked down at her, unmoved. Grace had made her bed, and now she would lie in it. For a fleeting moment, I entertained the thought. Perhaps, just maybe, a trace of love still lingered within me, enough to allow forgiveness. But that notion vanished as swiftly as it appeared. For months, she had treated me with nothing but scorn and malice. Now, the balance of power had shifted, and it was my turn to dictate the terms. "Stand up," I commanded, my voice as cold and impersonal as frost. She hesitated before complying, her hands trembling. Dark streaks of mascara stained her face, her tears leaving trails of defeat. I met her gaze and felt a grim sense of vindication. "You wanted to see what it was like with other men? Go ahead," I said, my tone sharp and unyielding. "But know this, you've lost the one person who truly cared about you." Her cries grew more desperate, but the empathy I once felt was gone, extinguished like a candle in a storm. The woman I once loved was no longer standing before me. In her place was a stranger I could barely tolerate. "Leave," I said firmly, gesturing toward the door. "Gather your things and get out." "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered, her voice fragile and uncertain. "That's not my problem anymore," I replied, devoid of emotion. She lingered for a moment, as if hoping for some sign of mercy, but none came. Defeated, she turned and shuffled to the bedroom, her shoulders slumped under the weight of her failure. I stood rooted to the spot, watching her retreat, a strange sense of closure washing over me. In the days that followed, she reached out, calls, texts, even emails, begging for another chance, promising to make things right. I ignored every plea. I had finally taken back control. She was gone, and I was free. The weeks turned into months. Grace had left with only her clothes and a few belongings. My home was mine again, untouched by her toxicity. My life had been rebuilt piece by piece without her shadow looming over it. Then, one night, everything changed. A knock came at the door, startling me from my solitude. When I opened it, there she stood. Grace was barely recognizable. Her face was pale, her hair unkempt, and her eyes hollow with despair. "David," she murmured, her voice frail. "I have nowhere else to go." For a moment I simply stared at her, taking in the pitiful figure before me. This was the same woman who once told me I wasn't enough, and now she was here, begging for a place in my life. A dark idea began to take shape, calculated and deliberate. I could have refused her outright, sent her back into the night without a second thought. But instead, I smiled, a slow, measured smile. "All right," I said after a long pause. Her face lit up with the faintest glimmer of hope, but I wasn't finished. "But there will be conditions." "Anything," she said quickly, nodding with desperation. "I'll do whatever you want." I stepped closer, my voice low and commanding. "From this moment on, you're mine, Grace. You'll do exactly as I say without question or hesitation. You wanted freedom to explore? Now, you'll understand what it means to be completely under someone else's control." Her eyes widened in shock, but she didn't argue. She knew she had no other choice. And so, Grace became a shadow of her former self, entirely at my mercy. She cleaned, cooked, and catered to my every demand. I claimed her body without restraint, using her as I pleased. It was harsh, undeniably so. But after all the pain she had inflicted on me, it felt like balance had finally been restored. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.